Right. So today, we're going to do a deep dive into something, a little different.
Okay.
We're going to be looking at an Audible review
Interesting.
of Pride and Prejudice.
Oh, well.
You might think classic, stuffy,
Right.
but there's so much more to it.
There is.
I mean, we've got family drama, we've got social pressure, and
Oh.
we've got romance that honestly
Joe.
still works centuries later.
I mean, it's amazing.
It really is.
So whether you're like a huge Jane Austen fan or
Right.
you've never even heard of her,
Yeah.
we're going to break down this review and see what we can get out of it.
Okay, so what's interesting to me about this review is, like, right away,
Yeah.
it focuses on the narrator's performance.
Hmm.
Like, it's its own art form, almost.
Oh, that's interesting.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It really makes you think about how, like,
Uh.
a good narrator can completely change how you experience a story.
Right.
Even one that you've read 100 times. Absolutely, yeah.
So that's what I'm interested in right off the bat.
Well, okay, so let's talk about first impressions then.
Okay.
So the reviewer right away was just gushing about how the narrator
Yeah.
absolutely nailed the voices of the different characters.
Uh-huh.
And they specifically mentioned Mr. Bennet
Okay.
and his dry wit, that subtle sarcasm that just
Yeah.
drips off the page.
Right.
Apparently the narrator just
Right.
brings it to life perfectly.
It's like they become like a voice actor,
Yeah.
like they embody each character.
Right.
The reviewer even talked about how the narrator like delivered Mrs. Bennet's lines with this like flustered, anxious energy,
Yeah.
perfectly capturing her personality.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It makes you wonder like how much does that
Right.
vocal interpretation influence our perception of the character?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the narrator adds this whole
It's like another
new dimension to the story, right?
Yeah.
It's not just the words on the page anymore. It's how we hear them
Yeah, exactly.
and how we understand the characters.
Uh-huh.
So speaking of the characters,
Okay.
let's talk about the Bennet family.
Okay.
The reviewer specifically highlighted
Okay.
the contrast between Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, which, let's be honest, is comedy gold.
Yeah.
Mr. Bennet, with his witty remarks and his subtle digs at his wife's social ambitions,
Right.
versus Mrs. Bennet, who is just completely consumed
Yeah.
by the need to marry off her daughters.
It's so funny.
Right.
And the reviewer points out how the narrator's performance emphasizes this, right? Like,
Oh, wow.
like Mr. Bennet's lines are delivered in this like dry, understated tone.
Uh-huh.
And then Mrs. Bennet's voice is like high-pitched and almost frantic.
Yeah.
But it's more than just like a funny dynamic though, right?
Right.
Austen is using this family to like
Yeah.
critique the societal pressures on women at the time.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Marriage wasn't just about love.
Right.
It was about economic survival.
It's true. Yeah, it makes you think about how much of Mrs. Bennet's anxiety
Yeah.
was driven by genuine concern
Right.
for her daughter's futures.
Totally.
I mean, without a good marriage,
Exactly.
what options did women really have back then?
Yeah. So while we might chuckle at her over-the-top antics,
Right.
it's important to remember the context of the time.
Absolutely.
Now on to a character who needs no introduction.
Right.
Elizabeth Bennet.
Of course, yeah.
The reviewer was very impressed
Okay.
with how the narrator captured Elizabeth's intelligence and her independent spirit.
Okay.
And it wasn't just in what she said, but how she said it.
Right.
That spark of defiance and wit that shines through.
And that's what makes her so relatable.
Totally.
Even now,
Yep.
right? She's not afraid to challenge conventions,
Uh-huh.
especially when it comes to dealing with someone like Mr. Darcy.
Right.
The reviewer even mentioned a specific scene where Elizabeth is like verbally sparring with Darcy.
Oh, wow.
And you can practically hear the tension between them
Yeah.
just through the narrator's performance.
Wow, that's cool.
Right.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It's interesting, though, because Elizabeth's strength isn't just about being outspoken. It's also about her capacity for self-reflection and growth.
Right.
She makes mistakes, she misjudges people,
Yeah.
and she learns from those experiences.
It's true.
That's something we can all relate to.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. So speaking of mistakes,
Okay.
let's talk about
Okay.
the central conflict of the story.
Okay.
The clash between Elizabeth and Darcy.
Right.
It's not just your typical, like,
Yeah.
hate at first sight trope.
Right.
No. The reviewer highlights how their initial dislike stems from deeper issues of Pride and Prejudice on both sides.
Oh, interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
So Darcy, with his wealth and status, comes across as very arrogant and dismissive, especially towards Elizabeth's family.
Right.
And Elizabeth, influenced by Wickham's charming facade, completely misjudges Darcy's character.
It's a classic case of first impressions gone wrong.
Totally.
Isn't it?
Amplified by the social pressures of the time.
It's amazing how Austen takes something so universal, like a bad first impression, and weaves it into this intricate web of social commentary. It's just brilliant.
It is.
And we've all been there.
No, for sure.
Misjudging someone based on appearances or preconceived notions.
It happens all the time.
Right.
Yeah. And Austen takes it a step further, though.
Yeah.
By showing how those prejudices can have real consequences. And the reviewer was really emphasizing how the narrator's voice underscores all this tension. Like Darcy's lines are delivered with a certain aloofness, even a hint of disdain at times. And Elizabeth's voice, while it's spirited, also betrays her own prejudices against Darcy in his world.
So
it makes their eventual shift towards understanding and dare I say, love all the more impactful.
It's a great point.
Right. Okay, so we've got the initial clash, we've got the simmering tension.
Right.
But let's not forget the catalyst that really throws things into turmoil. Wickham.
Wickham.
Right.
Yeah.
The reviewer teased how Wickham's deception plays a central role in fueling the conflict between Elizabeth and Darcy.
You know that charming soldier with a hidden dark side?
Oh, Wickham. He's the ultimate charmer, right?
He is.
Weaving this web of lies and manipulation. It's crazy.
What makes him so fascinating and so dangerous is how believable he is.
Right.
He plays the victim so well, preying on Elizabeth's sympathy and confirming her prejudices against Darcy.
It's really clever.
And the reviewer mentioned how the narrator perfectly captures that duality too.
Oh, wow.
Like Wickham's charm is like laced with this subtle undercurrent of insincerity.
Yeah, that's amazing.
You know? Yeah. So it's really well done.
It's so clever how Austen uses him to highlight the dangers of surface judgments.
Yeah. Right.
Totally.
He's a reminder that things aren't always what they seem. And sometimes the most charming people are the ones hiding the darkest secrets.
Absolutely.
So that brings us to a theme that's woven throughout the whole novel. And that really comes alive in the Audible version, according to the reviewer class in society. The narrator's performance
isn't just about capturing individual characters. It's about highlighting the social hierarchy of Austen's world.
The reviewer specifically pointed out how the narrator uses subtle vocal cues to distinguish between characters from different social classes.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so for example, the nouveau rich Bingley family is portrayed with this like slightly exaggerated refinement. Almost like they're trying too hard to fit in with the established upper class. And then you have Darcy and Lady Catherine de Bourgh, whose voices are imbued with this sense of effortless superiority.
It's like the narrator's painting this sonic picture of the social landscape, isn't it? And it's not just about accents or tones or anything.
It's everything.
It's the pacing, the emphasis, the subtle inflections that convey so much about a character's place in the world.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder, like, if we were to listen closely to the voices around us today, what kind of social cues would we be picking up on?
That's a fascinating thought.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, Austen was a master at observing and satirizing the social dynamics of her time.
Absolutely. But what's remarkable is how those same dynamics, those same anxieties about status and belonging, they still resonate with us today.
It's true.
Even if they manifest in different ways.
Absolutely.
It's crazy. Yeah.
It's like we're all still navigating our own versions of Pemberley. Trying to find our place in this complex social web.
Totally.
But we'll dive deeper into that a little bit later.
That's good.
For now, why don't we take a break?
Okay.
And we'll come back and we'll We'll talk about some of the deeper themes of Pride and Prejudice in part 2. Sounds good. Welcome back.
So as we kind of delve a little deeper into this review, it becomes pretty clear that Pride and Prejudice is more than just a charming romance.
Right.
You know, it tackles some pretty profound themes.
Yeah.
Themes that are just as relevant today
That's true.
as they were over 2 centuries ago.
It's amazing.
So what are some of those big themes that jumped out at you?
Well, let's start with the obvious one.
Okay.
Right there in the title. Prejudice.
Right.
The reviewer really highlights how the narrator's performance emphasizes Elizabeth's initial judgments about Darcy.
Okay.
You know, she's so quick to believe Wickham's lies and to see Darcy as this arrogant, aloof snob.
Classic case of judging a book by its cover.
Oh, totally.
Right.
And haven't we all been guilty of that at some point?
Of course.
Yeah, we all make snap judgments based on limited information, appearances, preconceived notions. And the narrator subtly highlights this by giving Elizabeth's voice this indignant,
interesting,
almost self-righteous tone
when
she's talking about Darcy in those early chapters.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, like the narrator's giving us a glimpse into Elizabeth's inner thoughts, revealing her own biases and her blind spots.
Yeah, and then you have Darcy, who's equally guilty of prejudice, but in a different way.
Okay.
His pride and his sense of social superiority blind him to Elizabeth's true worth.
Right.
He dismisses her family as beneath him and initially fails to see the intelligent, spirited woman she truly is.
So it's a two-way street, this prejudice thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Both Elizabeth and Darcy are trapped in their own limited perspectives, unable to see each other clearly.
That makes sense.
And that brings us to the theme of pride.
Okay.
Which is so closely intertwined with prejudice.
Yeah.
Darcy's pride makes him arrogant and inflexible. It prevents him from acknowledging his own flaws and from truly appreciating Elizabeth's unique qualities.
It's interesting how you say that.
Yeah.
Because the reviewer even noted how the narrator gives Darcy this stiff, almost haughty tone in their early encounters. And it really brings that aspect of his character to life.
It does. It's not just about the words. It's about how they're spoken.
Yeah.
The tone, the emphasis. And that's where the brilliance of Austen's writing comes in.
Right.
She doesn't just tell us that Darcy is proud. She shows us through his actions, his words, and even his silences.
Okay.
And a skilled narrator, like this one, can pick up on those nuances and convey them through vocal performance.
So we have prejudice.
Yeah.
We have pride. And we also have a whole lot of miscommunication happening.
Oh, absolutely. So many of the conflicts in Pride and Prejudice arise from this lack of open and honest communication.
Okay.
Elizabeth and Darcy spend so much time making assumptions about each other instead of actually talking things through.
Yeah, that reminds me of so many relationships. Right. And not just romantic ones.
It's true.
How often do we let pride or fear get in the way of having those crucial conversations?
It's a universal struggle.
Right.
And Austen captures it so brilliantly. Yeah. You know, think about the scene where Darcy proposes to Elizabeth for the first time. It's a disaster.
Yeah, it is.
Partly because he's so awkward and arrogant, but also because he's holding back so much.
Right.
He doesn't fully explain his actions or his feelings.
And Elizabeth, fueled by her own prejudices and wounded pride, rejects him without really hearing him out.
Yeah, the reviewer mentions how the narrator captures all this tension.
Oh, wow.
Perfectly.
Yeah.
Darcy's voice is filled with this suppressed emotion, while Elizabeth's is sharp and defensive. It's like you can feel the walls going up between them.
Wow.
It's a masterclass in how not to communicate.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even when we think we're being clear, there's always room for misunderstanding, especially when pride and prejudice are involved.
It's true.
Which brings us to another major theme, one that's really emphasized in the audio version, Class and Society.
Of course, yeah.
The reviewer talked about how the narrator's performance really highlights the social hierarchy of Austen's world, using different voices and accents to distinguish between the characters from various social strata.
And it's not just about the accent.
No, it's not.
Right.
It's about the subtle cues in their speech patterns, their vocabulary, even their silences.
Right.
The narrator uses these vocal techniques to paint this vivid picture of the social landscape.
Wow.
The rigid boundaries and the anxieties that come with navigating that world.
It's amazing, right?
Yeah. One thing that really struck me about the review was how the narrator differentiates between the nouveau riche, like the Bingley family, and the established upper class, like Darcy and Lady Catherine de Bourgh.
Right, right.
The Bingleys, despite their wealth, are portrayed with a certain social awkwardness.
Yeah.
Their voices are a bit too polished. Their manners are a bit too eager to please. It's like they're constantly trying to prove themselves worthy of their newfound wealth and status.
Like the narrator subtly mocking their social climbing.
Exactly.
Right.
And then you have Darcy and Lady Catherine, whose voices are imbued with this sense of effortless superiority. They don't need to try hard.
Right.
Their social standing is unquestioned. It's interesting. The narrator captures this perfectly, giving them this air of authority and entitlement that speaks volumes about the power dynamics of the time.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
How something as simple as a voice can convey so much about a character's social position and their worldview.
It makes you realize how much we communicate through our voices, even without realizing it.
Absolutely, yeah.
So this brings us to the theme of social mobility, which is so central to Pride and Prejudice.
Right.
The novel explores the challenges and anxieties of trying to move up the social ladder, especially for women.
Right, yeah.
Think about Mrs. Bennet and her relentless pursuit of wealthy husbands for her daughters.
Right.
It's often played for laughs, but it also reflects the limited options available to women at the time.
It's true.
Marriage wasn't just about love. It was about economic security and social standing.
It's so true.
And the narrator subtly highlights this through Mrs. Bennet's frantic, almost desperate tone.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that while we might find her matchmaking schemes amusing, they were driven by a very real sense of urgency and anxiety.
Right.
You know, it's like Austen is saying, don't just laugh at Mrs. Bennet. Try to understand her motivations, the societal pressures that shaped her worldview.
And that's what makes Pride and Prejudice so compelling.
Totally.
Even centuries later.
Yeah.
It's a story that entertains us while also challenging us to think critically about social structures.
Right.
About the ways in which class and gender shape our lives and our choices.
Absolutely.
And a skilled narrator, like the one highlighted in this review, can bring those nuances to life in a way that a traditional reading might not.
I think you're right.
It's really cool.
It is.
So it's amazing how a novel written over 200 years ago can still feel so relevant today.
It really is.
So speaking of relevance, let's shift gears a little bit
and
talk about the theme of personal growth. You know, it's amazing how Austen manages to weave all these, serious themes into a story that's also just super entertaining.
Right.
Like we laugh, we swoon.
Totally.
We get swept up in the drama. And along the way are also challenged to think about the world around us.
Exactly. And that brings us to what makes Pride and Prejudice and this Audible review so enduringly popular, you know? I mean, it's become a cultural touchstone, hasn't it?
It really has.
It's been adapted into countless films.
Oh, yeah.
Miniseries, even musicals.
I know, it's crazy.
There's something about the story that just continues to resonate with audiences generation after generation.
I think it's the characters, for one thing. They're so well developed.
Right.
So flawed and relatable.
Yeah.
Even with their 19th century sensibilities. Elizabeth, Darcy, even the often ridiculed Mrs. Bennet.
Yeah.
They feel like real people grappling with real problems.
And this Audible review highlights how the narrator's performance adds another layer to that relatability.
Oh, interesting.
You know?
Yeah.
It's not just about reading the words.
Yeah.
It's about embodying the characters, conveying their emotions, their social nuances, their very essence.
Wow.
Through the power of voice.
Thinking about it, the choice of narrators can really
oh yeah,
make or break an audiobook experience.
Totally.
A different voice, a different accent, even a subtle shift in tone can completely change how we perceive a character.
For sure.
Imagine Mr. Darcy with a booming theatrical voice versus a more subtle, nuanced delivery. It would totally change how we see him, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like casting an actor for a film role.
Right.
The right voice can add depth humor, even a touch of irony that might not be as evident on the page.
Right.
It's fascinating how subjective the experience of listening to an audiobook can be.
Totally. Each listener brings their own baggage.
Right.
Their own interpretations, their own preferences.
Yeah.
It's like a collaboration almost between the author, the narrator, and the listener, creating a unique experience each time.
And it sparks conversations, debates, even disagreements.
That's true.
You know, we're encouraged to think critically about the story, the characters, and the themes in a way that a traditional reading might not inspire.
This Audible review, for example, sparked a great conversation between us about the themes and character development, things we might not have explored so deeply otherwise.
Yeah.
It's like the audio format adds this whole new dimension to the story.
Yeah. One thing that struck me about the review was how it mentioned the use of sound effects and music in the production. It's not just a straightforward reading. It's an immersive experience.
Wow.
Almost like listening to a radio play.
That's really cool.
The reviewer specifically mentioned how subtle background music heightened the emotional impact of certain scenes.
Oh, wow.
And how sound effects, like the clip-clop of horses' hooves or the rustling of silk dresses, transported the listener back to Austen's world.
It's like they created a sonic landscape to complement the story.
It's amazing.
It makes you want to revisit Pride and Prejudice.
Right.
This time through audio.
Yeah.
To experience those added layers.
And it makes you appreciate how much thought and artistry goes into creating a truly immersive audiobook.
It really does.
And it speaks to the enduring power of storytelling, doesn't it?
It does.
Whether through the written word or the spoken word.
Right.
A good story can transport us to different worlds, make us laugh, make us cry, and ultimately make us think.
It's true. And that's the beauty of a deep dive like this.
Right.
You know, we get to unpack all these layers of meaning, all these hidden gems that we might miss on a surface reading. It's like we're peeling back the layers of an onion.
Right.
Revealing more and more complexity and depth.
And sometimes just like an onion, it brings a few tears to our eyes.
It's true.
But they're tears of recognition. Tears of understanding, tears of that aha moment when we see ourselves reflected in the story.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
So I think that's a perfect note to wrap up on. You know, we've explored the characters, the themes, the social commentary, and even the artistic craft of audiobook narration.
It's been quite a journey.
It has.
But ultimately, Pride and Prejudice continues to captivate us.
Yeah.
Because it's a story about human connection, about overcoming obstacles, about finding love and happiness in unexpected places.
And who doesn't love a good love story?
Right.
Especially one with witty banter, social intrigue, and a happily ever after.
Absolutely. So to our listeners, if you haven't experienced Pride and Prejudice, I highly recommend giving it a try.
Yes.
Especially through the immersive world of audio.
Do it.
You might just discover a new appreciation.
You might.
For this timeless classic.
It's true.
Until next time, happy listening.